Welcome to the Bioinformatics CRO podcast. I'm your host, Grant Belgard, and today we're joined by Dr. Joanne Hackett, Vice President of Health System Services at IQVIA and Chair of the Board at eLife. We'll explore what she's building now at IQVIA, her career path across science and industry, and her most practical advice for people working at the intersection of genomics, data, and healthcare. Dr. Hackett, welcome.
Great. Thank you for having me. And I was just saying before we started the podcast, we have known each other for a very long time and haven't seen each other in a very long time. So it's very nice to be with you again.
Great to see you again as well. So how do you describe your role today to someone outside of healthcare?
Yes. So this is always the interesting thing when you're sitting around a dinner table and somebody says, "What do you do?" And the people who do things with their hands are usually the ones who get the greatest following, because you can explain exactly what it is that you do. But the rest of us who do more with our brains have a little bit of a harder time either convincing ourselves that we do something useful or those around us that we do something interesting. But I personally think that I have a very interesting role at IQVIA. And IQVIA is one of these companies that brings together a lot of different components. There's advances in data science, technology, and healthcare expertise. And the ultimate aim is to help customers make better decisions and ultimately improve patient outcomes. And the nice thing about working in a company whose mission is to help create a healthier world is that we actually do get to do that. Whether or not we're the individuals who are accelerating the innovations or making those intelligent connections across the healthcare ecosystem, we really are making progress in changing the way healthcare is being delivered. And I'm very fortunate that my role, I spend most of my time across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, but we are a global company. And because of that, we can take best practice from one part of the world and see whether or not it can be useful in other parts of the world as well. And what I find probably the most satisfying is that we get to work across health systems. And for me, that's so important because all of us are patients, whether we're talking to someone at a pharmacist to either pick up plasters because we've scraped our knee or because we're picking up a prescription for something that's a long-term condition. We are in many aspects of the health system, and we rely so much on needing that connectivity and that data. And my role is to staple that together in various different ways. A big part is understanding where governments are finding issues with regards to healthcare spend, trying to understand how they can maybe attract more clinical trials, and also to make sure that the institutions that sit within these countries are fit for purpose. And that doesn't always mean complicated systems. It means trying to map out that patient journey. Again, maybe it starts in the pharmacy or it ends up in a very sophisticated tertiary hospital, but what is it that we actually need that pulls these different components together? So that's really my role, is to try to help pull that together with both the local focus as well as the global experience. And because I am a geneticist, of course, I always bring a genomic and precision medicine perspective into the way that we solve problems.
So when you look across your region, what outcomes are health systems asking for most urgently?
Very often, most health systems are trying to find ways to be more efficient. And it's not that it's trying to cut costs, to try to do something cheaper because they're trying to cut corners. There is a lot of waste in the system because it just quite literally has not been mapped out. And by the time it does get mapped out, the world has changed. So very often it's trying to understand more about efficiencies, trying to understand what data actually needs to be collected. We spend an awful lot of time thinking more is better. It's not necessarily always the case. So the questions are around, should I be trying to attract clinical trials to this country? Do I even have the right patient population that have certain mutations that industry is looking for? Are there particular types of software that will work better in my country because it's got a particular module that's necessary for pharmacy integration into a hospital? It's all of the stuff that's both local, but at the same time, thinking about the efficiencies that you can pull from various different parts of the world that would make it make sense as well.
Where do you see the biggest near-term opportunities to improve patient journeys end to end?
A lot of people think that it has to be this one-size-fits-all approach, and you have to build a platform that takes in 15 different data questionnaires or whatever else. It's really not that complicated. For me, at the end of the day, I went into genetics, as you probably remember when we first met. I went into genetics because I was a child with a rare disease. And to this day, it still fascinates me that individuals can't put themselves in the shoes of someone who's been ill or has had an experience in a hospital. It's not complicated. When people say that they've got a rash because they've taken particular medication, if you were to ask, did that happen 2 weeks ago, or when it happened, was the rash itchy? If you don't, our lives are busy. But the last thing we remember is the absolute detail. Empower the individual to take a bit more responsibility about their health as well. So the near-term opportunities, in my mind, are treating individuals, because we are all patients, like sophisticated individuals, and giving them a bit more responsibility about their health care. Give them the tools that actually connect to something useful. If you want to know that I had a rash and it happened 4 hours after I took my medication, if I've logged that and you have access to it, surely if that's integrated into my record and you can see that, it's going to make that next step a lot easier. In addition to that, there are so many people doing research now and real-world studies, real-world evidence. Why can't that be much more accessible so that you start to realize that the individuals who have early onset Parkinson's were also in the majority of the individuals who had miscarriages. They also had teenage acne. They also were the kid who was a bit clumsy and fell off their bike. If we can start to find those patterns, we can start to treat earlier and allow people to have longer and healthier lives. So for me, it's not necessarily about big policies and changes and sophisticated technology. A lot of that stuff will help, but I really think that we still, this is not just one country, this is several countries. We still just haven't taken it back to the basic steps of, I am a human being, I am feeling ill, I am ill, I need someone to see me, and I need the information to be collected, and I'm going to need treatment. Really not that complicated.
How do you envision that being implemented in practice? If you're looking on the timescale of a couple years, what do you think is the most feasible path towards collecting that?
I'm really delighted to see, especially in Europe, there has been a lot of funding made available through the COVID Recovery and Resilience Fund. And a lot of countries are applying for quite creative solutions. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated. I say creative, which is a slightly different word. And what they're trying to understand is, if we were to tackle a certain type of cancer, for example, or cardiovascular disease, they're not trying to do everything. They're trying to do a smaller population or a particular niche area that they're trying to work on, and solving that, and then thinking about expanding it further. So for me, it's not the point solutions that are the shiny thing that people were thinking were the solution 5-10 years ago. It's thinking more about that, the broader aspect of what's needed to pull all this together. But instead of waiting for that perfect ecosystem, it's starting to carve out parts of it and think about a particular therapeutic area, for example, and then start to solve that. And what I'm also delighted to see, it's not just in isolation, let's build a registry because it's helpful. The thought process is that registry is going to be extremely valuable if we're collecting real-world data, if we have consent for research and recontact, if perhaps we have a sample that's linked to a biobank. It's not just solving the problem that the individual is facing today. It's, again, being able to do research into what would be prospective and retrospective data, which is also fantastic because scientific endeavors are changing on a daily basis.
What does a credible digital thread between lab, clinic, and home look like?
I think they really and truly are becoming closer, which is fantastic. I love this whole concept of virtual hospitals. there's very little that needs to be done in an actual physical institution today. We learned this through the pandemic not that long ago, that a lot of stuff can be done remotely. I love the fact that there's also been a lot more research going into sensors. I think it's fantastic that you can look at people's temperature and you can understand an infection is happening way before it's actually happening, especially for vulnerable or older individuals who don't necessarily understand what certain symptoms are telling them. And also, for many of us, we wake up in the morning feeling a little bit unwell, and probably there's been something that's been happening that we didn't necessarily know about. So if, generally speaking, healthy people aren't catching the symptoms early, we're no wonder we're waiting for people to get sick before they get better. That connection between allowing the patient and the individual to be more empowered about their own health. We're seeing more people take advantage of wearable technology that they themselves are purchasing, not just for their own health, but also to monitor their fitness levels and things like that. That connectivity with a virtual hospital and that connectivity with the physical hospital, I do hope at some point in the future, there's no such thing as accident and emergency for people with sore toenails. Why is this happening? How can we not triage this better? So I do see that connectivity happening, mostly based on the fact that we have smarter ways to collect data. And also individuals are a bit more curious about their own health now because we've demystified the fact that something weird is lurking and you're going to find out something very strange if you do a genetic test, for example. You're not going to find that someone has had an affair or they drink too much wine. You're not going to find that. You're going to find a better, more personalized way to treat them. So I do think that connection between the precision approach and also the generalized precision public approach is starting to get closer and closer together.
How do you think about the balance between privacy and utility, especially when working with data across multiple countries and jurisdictions and regulatory requirements?
That's definitely one of the things that I think we got wrong about 15 or 20 years ago. And I say we as in the general we in healthcare. We scared a lot of people into letting them think that if somebody found out something about them, it would be frowned upon or it would be a bad thing or they would be marginalized in some way. It doesn't really happen like that. And in fact, you start to see very creative ways that insurance companies are trying to understand protecting people from getting sick before they get sick because it's much more beneficial for them to do that. You're starting to see some companies, employers saying, oh, if we could offer you some health testing and make you your best version of yourself, would you like that? Of course, they're being nice, but ultimately, you're a much better employee if you're alive and healthy. So we're starting to see that the responsibility for the health of the individual is not just of the interests of the individual, it's by other factors that are sitting around it as well. So we're starting to see that migration a little bit differently, which I think personally is quite exciting. And that's making people feel a little bit more comfortable about the data sharing aspect of it and that brokerage of data. The other thing that we're starting to realize, and again, I do think that people were scared for a long time, thinking that every single thing would be attributed back to them. You can do a lot of research on data that doesn't have to be identifiable. You do not need to know my postcode to know that I'm 172 centimeters. You probably need the 172 centimeters. You don't need the postcode. So what is that core data that we actually need to be able to do the research and innovation? And I just think that as an industry, we've gotten smarter about what that core data looks like, as opposed to it's not always more is better. And the more that individuals realize that they can be part of a study by not even ever having to give their name or the characteristics that they're describing is actually much more interesting than the fact that they go on holiday in Spain, for example. You don't need to share all that. And I do think that there are much better regulations now about how the data is collected, who the data processor is. And also, I think in the very near future, especially in Europe, with the advent of the European health data space, this will change the way you use data for primary and secondary purposes. And I think that will give confidence to individuals to allow that data to be collected and used for the appropriate reasons.
What use cases for genomics do you see are crossing from boutique to routine the fastest?
So many people got very excited about doing consumer genetics, which is great. I think that's a good way to get exposed to it. And the nice thing about that is it's demystified for a lot of people that genomics was some weird, scary, invasive thing. So we're starting to see that now translate much more into even some of the health testing that's routinely rolled out is looking at some of the celiac disease, for example, things that don't seem as scary as some very advanced rare disease that somebody doesn't know anything about. So we're making it a little bit more mainstream, which I think is also helping people. And the thing that to me is going to change the way that people view genomics and healthcare is pharmacogenomics. It's such an easy thing to implement. And the minute somebody realizes you shouldn't take this medication because you can't process it, or you have to take half a dose or double a dose, people listen to it because it's science-backed. And that you get a very different outcome when people are told, everybody knows they should probably lose some weight, exercise more, not drink as much, don't smoke. Hearing that thing over and over again is fine, but being faced with the reality that you actually cannot process certain medications and they will hurt you or they won't work for you at all and don't bother taking them, it's a very different response. And it's so cheap. So to me, the pharmacogenomics era is just taking off now. I can definitely see that almost being a screening mechanism for most individuals. You get something back about your own health very quickly, even if the answer is you don't have anything and there's none of these genes and drugs that you need to worry about. Even if it's only that, you still have some information back. So there's that trade-off. So I think the pharmacogenomics space is the one it's segueing into routine healthcare very quickly.
What evidence do payers still want to see before they embrace broader precision medicine approaches?
It's very strange in my mind when you have to think about changing the landscape so fundamentally just for the sake of a couple of dollars. I think that's so sad, but that is the world that we're living in. So let's park that to one side. I do think it has to be more about the fundamental difference that it can make in outcomes. And to me, I've always had the belief that earlier is better. And this is where I'm starting to be quite delighted by seeing much more interest in some of the real world studies, starting to understand these retrospective data sets, what are they actually telling us, and trying to look using artificial intelligence and different technologies to find those patterns to try to then map that back. I do think that's where payers don't want to be paying for something that's not going to work. I wouldn't either. None of us are going to want to go out and buy something that's not going to work. That doesn't work like that. So how can they get the best value? And a lot of people, we need to remember, think that they are amateur healthcare professionals because of this wonderful thing called the internet. And it's actually I think it is extremely frightening for healthcare professionals to be told full stop that they don't know what they're doing because someone has run a search and has come up with something completely different. And their friend's grandmother, sister's brother is on this particular medication and they should be on it as well. We've almost got to that tipping point where the faith in the healthcare practitioner has been taken away because the patient, if you will, or the human being is trying to make those decisions on behalf of themselves. I do think that balance between taking responsibility for your own health, doing a bit of research is useful, but ultimately the experience of a healthcare professional has to be married up at the same time. So for me, trying to understand how decisions get made, the science that sits behind it, and then most importantly, if it's not going to work, don't prescribe it, don't do anything like that. That to me is the evidence piece. And we're getting much better about looking at different types of evidence in order to be able to prove that. But genomics is a key thing to making that work. There's just a lot of stuff that you don't take certain medications if they're just not going to work. And why would you possibly do a cell and gene therapy on something that's not going to have any outcome? You just wouldn't do that. And finding the right patient population, stratifying by genotype. We're getting a lot smarter now, which to me is going to help get some of these orphan designations across and approved and actually have a much better outcome for individuals as well.
What do you consider fit for purpose real-world evidence? What makes it cross the line from merely interesting to really decision grade?
For me, it has to do more about the quality of the data. Again, goes back to the simple principles of it's not necessarily more is better. I would much rather look at, 100 data points that are very deep, especially if that's what I'm looking for, as opposed to 10,000 data points, which tell me hardly anything. The other thing that is getting a lot more traction than even probably 5 years ago is companies spending more time looking at the diversity of data. And it's not just a throwaway term anymore. I think for a while, people thought it was the right thing to say or do. The same way, getting the patient voice was something that was just thrown into an application several years ago. It's very different now. And with diversity in data, the reason why is actually mainstream today is because we have it. We didn't have it 5 years ago. People didn't build the registries. They didn't have the data. So we're seeing it's just a very different time now. And to me, that's a very positive thing because it's a very rapidly evolving area. And the data is coming thick and fast, which is great, which then just allows better decisions to be made. So having more data, deeper data, and more diverse data is allowing the real world evidence studies to be a cut above than where they were even 2 or 3 years ago.
Where are decentralized or hybrid trials genuinely improving access to the trials or speed?
It's a combination between getting individuals who wouldn't necessarily, sometimes you have to travel to a site and you have to travel because there was no other option previously. The healthcare landscape has changed tremendously. So that has changed in the sense that a lot of the different things that were either being collected, whether it was just a blood sample or monitoring something, a lot of that stuff can either be sent to a patient's home or it can be done in a community center or a pharmacy. So if you look at the physical aspect of getting people to a particular site, that has changed tremendously. In addition to that, many of the things that were being collected, you would have to come in to have a little chat with someone to go over your symptoms, electronic. That was allowing people who didn't, again, a big part was getting individuals to a physical site more than anything. And now there's more people who are going door to door, doing things in a very different way. So the physical side of it has changed tremendously. In addition to that, the way that you're able to find, especially for rare diseases, individuals across many countries, because very rarely are you going to find enough individuals from one particular country to be able to do the study. The fact that there are easier ways to share that data today, to be able to recruit across many different countries, is also allowing the right individuals to be recruited into the trial to basically run the study from many different countries, which again, even 5-10 years ago, the sheer cost of that alone, because the infrastructure wasn't there, was the main reason why it just didn't happen.
Which countries are really bright spots for digital maturity and why?
So I'm slightly biased clearly towards anything that sits in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, because I spent almost all of my time supporting and growing business in those countries. But I do probably have a very special spot in my heart for the Middle East. I've spent a lot of my time there. There's a huge amount of investment in healthcare as a whole. Digital maturity is just, it's growing so quickly. Every time from one month to the next, something different has changed. So the sheer growth and expansion in the Middle East is just absolutely fascinating. And I'm very pleased to see that happening. Where I'm equally delighted to see a lot of progress is in Africa. And I know it's a throwaway term to discuss a lot of different countries, but there are several countries that have been working very closely together to share best practice, to think about doing clinical studies, and to even share data in a different way. And just the amount of frugal innovation that you're able to see in Africa is, again, just very fantastic, because it's changing that landscape in a way that a small incremental change is making a massive impact. And so I think the two areas that are probably, so digital maturity, 100% for the Middle East, the access and the change in the way that healthcare is being delivered, perhaps not necessarily digital maturity, but for Africa, it's happening in a very fast way as well. Now, what I would also highlight, going back to the comment about the COVID Recovery Resilience Fund, Europe, and again, that's a fairly broad statement covering many different countries, has tapped into some very creative ways to change the way healthcare is being delivered. And a lot of that is about investing in the infrastructure that's needed for digital transformation. So those are the three hot spots, if I will. And I'm sure if I had to really think hard, I could pull out a couple of named countries, but I wouldn't want to do that on the spot.
That's interesting. Thanks. Now, pivoting to our second major topic, which is you. What drew you into working at the interface of science, data, and health systems in the first place?
So I was one of these people who definitely wanted to be an academic. I was 100% sure that's what I wanted to do. I started my PhD. I was 100% sure that was exactly what I wanted to do. And during my first postdoctoral fellowship, I was introduced to the commercial world, and I could see that as a way to make data or assets accessible. It wasn't about money. It had nothing to do with that at all. To me, it was the access side of things. And that was new and exciting. So as an academic, the only thing that you have is your brain, and you can only think about, your next grant for your next publication. It's not necessarily as collaborative. And I'm a trained geneticist and a tissue engineer. So this commercial world helping me to make discoveries more accessible was quite interesting. So then I ended up thinking about a way that I could collaborate, do things differently, which again is not necessarily a typical academic mindset per se. And then I ended up working where I say is the triple helix, if you will, which is the intersection between academia, business, and the clinical communities. And I did love the academic world. And then when I worked at Pfizer and combined that with a very fast-paced industry job, I thought this is really quite exciting. And I could see the parallels in both. And I loved that section of my career as well. Worked for the UK government, which was a very strange but interesting place as well. No one grows up as a geneticist expecting to work for the government after you've just been a professor of regenerative medicine, all very strange. But it was a really interesting way to see how decisions were made. And healthcare decisions, strangely enough, that are being made for a government or for a hospital, of course, that's directly related to how research gets done and how industry works with governments as well. So seeing that all come together was extremely interesting. And then for me, working at IQVIA, effectively, I actually collaborated with IQVIA during two of those stages of my career. And I realized that, if you were to think about a global genomics dream, it can really only be achieved if you actually combine all of those different forces together. So for me, it was a no. And if I had to, if somebody said, "Oh, you have to pick one of these three sections and go back and only work there," I would go back to all of them very happily. Each of one of them was extremely fulfilling in different ways. But the fact that I can weave between them now is it's delightful.
Looking back, what were the 2 or 3 inflection points that most shaped your path?
The biggest thing that happened to me was getting access to the commercial world. And that happened not because I was someone who knew what I was doing and was very progressive about that way of thinking. As I said, I was a hard and fast academic. The fact that I had a postdoc supervisor who encouraged me to think differently, who allowed me to think outside the box and exposed me to that. If I didn't have someone basically pushing me for that opportunity, I never would have been able to see that. And that kind of ended up then allowing me to be exposed to slightly different individuals. It was the job at Pfizer that got me exposed to the UK government. So it were these things that it was the overlap and the intersection as opposed to the hard and fast decisions in one particular role. But to be honest with you, I'm also that annoying person that always asks questions, wants to know what comes before, what comes after, why is this fitting together? And I think maybe people just get tired of dealing with people like me and say, gosh, we just got to give this person something different to do that keeps out their energy contained, because otherwise they're going to end up driving us crazy. But being curious and asking the questions gets you noticed, and people start to realize that you may think a bit differently, which is sometimes not a bad.
How do you decide when it's time to take on a new remit versus deepening where you are?
I have had to become much more selective as time goes on, mostly based on the fact that if I said yes to everything, which I definitely said yes to a lot of things when I was younger, again, for the exposure, for the experience, and it was absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't do it any differently. The thing is, with certain responsibilities now, it's not just, I have to get something back from it as well. It's not just I can constantly give. I want to learn. I'm not too old to learn. I'm not, I'm to pasture yet. I want it to be a transaction more so than me just being able to help someone else. And there's so much to learn. And for me, understanding how I sometimes can learn more from a 30-minute reverse mentoring experience with a young second year economics student who's doing an internship, for example, than I can be sitting on a board. So it's all about how I think that I can both help the individual, but how the individual can help me as well.
What have you changed your mind about in the last 5 years?
What have I changed my mind about? Gosh, so many things. I think, for me, health has always been the thing that is zero compromise. If I was told I wasn't able to go to the gym, or if I wasn't able to exercise when I was traveling or something like that, that's not going to happen. I never compromised my fitness and my health. That's always been something that's been extremely important to me. I've probably changed my mind a bit on how much effort I need to put into that side of things as well. You can still be quite healthy and well-rounded without putting too much energy and emphasis into it. And I think because I am someone who does have a rare disease, I think I thought if I put so much energy now, I'm almost building up a little bit of collateral for later in life when I may need it. And clearly that's not the case. So I'm probably slightly more relaxed about that. And also have probably changed my mind a bit more on, I've always been a very critical person, both of myself and the people who, work for me, things like that. Like, I have very high expectations. I've probably learned to be a bit kinder, because we all have something going on in our lives, and you never know if the person in front of you has just received bad news. And yes, they might be sitting there taking a few extra minutes, getting their bank card out, but there's probably something you don't necessarily know. And I think that comes with either lived experience from an individual having something happen to them or something happen to their family. But I've probably become a little bit more tolerant towards not necessarily understanding why, but just accepting the fact that what you see is not necessarily all what you get.
Which early career habits aged well, and which did you have to unlearn?
I've always been someone who has put 100% of my effort into something I do. That's a characteristic that one of the first things people will probably always say, very hardworking. That's never served me wrong. If I'm going to do something, I follow through with that. That's never been a bad thing. And if I'm going to do it, it's going to be done well. I'm not just going to slap it together just to say that it's done. So the hard work, dedication, and doing it well has worked extremely well in my favor. Probably trying to get people to like me, and something that hasn't aged so well. We have to realize that not everybody is going to like everyone. It sometimes has nothing to do with the person. It sometimes has everything to do with the person. It's just not worth it. You have to learn very quickly how to work more professionally sometimes, as opposed to try to be the buddy of an individual. So that's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about anymore. People can respect you and not like you, and I would much rather them respect me than like me. There's no point in trying to win that side of it over. And the things that also probably has been extremely useful for me, which I've perhaps adapted, is how to be a leader. So some of the ways that and I think anybody can be a leader. You don't have to be senior in your career. You can be quite junior and still lead people. And I think the characteristics of leadership have changed for me, but that's probably more based on the roles that I've had as time has gone on, as opposed to the actual characteristics of how to lead.
And can you share a specific failure that ended up redirecting your trajectory?
People who say that failure is the best thing that's happened to them are telling the truth. There are so many things that we fail at that we never want to talk about. And sometimes maybe as it's happening, it's maybe not the right time to talk about it for a variety of different reasons. And we only wait until a certain time in our lives to be able to share that, which again, maybe there's particular reasons for that. But for many years, I didn't tell people that I had a rare disease, and I suffered through some of the different consequences that were happening because of that. I didn't want them to think I couldn't do the job or I wasn't good enough. So I feel personally as though I failed at being authentic very early in some of my roles. And it wasn't great to feel that I was scrambling to try to make it up or to try to be a different sort of person than I was. I think that was terrible that I did that. And I don't think it would have changed anything had I just been honest and had an open conversation. I didn't have to do anything any different. I don't know why. I just felt embarrassed about the whole entire thing. So that wasn't great. And I've helped start companies that were appalling. They were terrible companies. And it was so great that we realized it and we wrapped them up and moved on with it. And the first company that I started myself, which I knew I didn't want to leave this company, I didn't want to be the person responsible for it. And I sold it as quickly as possible. And there's so many people to this day that think, oh, it's so sad. No, to me, that wasn't a failure. To me, that was a massive success because I didn't want to do it. So it's strange how certain people's failures are considered to be other people's successes, but it's also what you take away from it. And for me, to learn how to be my authentic self or to make the decisions that were going to be the best for me were way more important than what somebody was saying, oh gosh, well, it's been so sad to sell your company. No, that was actually fantastic. Thank you very much.
On the topic of advice, what skill investments today will compound in the coming years?
You can never take away the traits of hard work, dedication, people being able to rely on you. Those are characteristics that take you an awful long way. And also being curious. I can't understand these people that we have the whole world in front of us. Ask questions like, why, if you don't know something, why just accept it in isolation? It's find out what happens before and after. Doesn't this help you understand things a lot more? So I really think it's important to be curious and dig in. And honestly, people are mean, bad things are going to happen. Call life. You can be upset about something, but honestly, you'll only be able to be a better version of yourself. It's grit, it's determination, it's just cracking on with it. We all have a huge amount to give. So why not put your best foot forward and make that the best possible opportunity, not just for yourself, but for others?
What would you deprioritize that's often overrated on a CV?
I don't know. I don't do all of these extra courses and brag about them and stuff like that. And these people, I think it's hilarious when they talk about all these fancy numbers and try to efficiencies of 4% and this and that. You're a person. I just don't understand these sorts of things. I don't buy into any of that stuff. I know that a lot of people are very, I don't know if they're necessarily contented with themselves or for other people, but just do the best version of you. It's not that complicated. And I get very, when I see these CVs and people are trying to take credit for turned around a complex organization in 60 days or whatever, there's no way. You didn't do it. And if you did do it, you had a team. And it's the fact that you won't take that step back and reflect on the fact that the team helped you support this, you're probably somebody who I wouldn't really want to work with anyway. It's not that hard to share the credit. There's always enough to go around. I don't like that kind of thing very much.
And for startup founders, how should a new product team validate real buyer demand inside a health system?
Yes, this is something that I think we could do a whole podcast on its own, because it's quite shocking how I will occasionally see this pitch deck come across my desk and you think, wow, it's scary that someone has put this together and has worked on it for several months when no one will buy it. And the biggest thing there's loads of things out there that could be created. There's a lot of different things that will help. Going back to the question earlier about what evidence do payers need for things, ask yourself who's going to pay. And it's not all about money, but if you're planning on selling a product, someone's going to have to buy it. So why would they buy it? How is it going to be rolled out? There's different regulations in different countries. Do you want to be across several different countries, different types of institutions? Who is going to pay for this? And whether you're a biotech, a medtech, a digital health company, you have to have a value proposition that's going to add value, as opposed to just, oh, it's great that we've decided to round the edges of the doorknob. Great, but no one's going to go out and commission 5,000 more of them. I know it looks better and it's nicer, but you need to find the thing that's going to make the difference, change it. And even if it is expensive, if it's worth it, people buy it. Look at the cell and gene therapies that are out there today. They're millions of dollars. They're bought for the obvious reason that they work. So it's not a cost issue. It's more about, is there actually a need for this, and will someone pay for it?
When you hear a pitch about AI in healthcare, what signals seriousness to you?
I don't think I've seen one yet. I'm sorry. That's probably not the appropriate answer. But the thing is, I guess I'm a geneticist. We've been using AI, quote unquote, for years now. There's no one who can look at the human genome and understand the many different, you can't. So there's always been tools to make our lives easier and faster. And being able to have tools that are going to do that and enhance it in a way that you've got the right information. There's very few algorithms that have been trained with the right type of data or the right amount of data. I think it's fantastic that there are going to be things that will be rolled out in hopefully due course. But if we're not there yet, I just understand why people get so hopped up about this. AI in healthcare, to me, would be that one of the best use cases will be for us to be able to use our phones to triage healthcare. And whether it's an emergency or whether it's just basic healthcare needs, why can't we think about the practical aspects of healthcare? The AI and pulling together data for research, predictive mechanisms and things like that, that is exactly where I'd love to be able to see it to go. But so many people are obsessed about the device or the whizzy thing that they can talk about that's going to happen today, when I just don't know if the data is in the right format, in the right place, diverse enough, and being pulled together by the right type of an agent to be able to make that make sense. So I personally haven't seen it yet, and therefore I'll remain skeptical until the right thing lands on my desk. Let's put it that way.
And for health system leaders, where can modest investments in data infrastructure yield outsized returns within a year?
A very simple thing is curating data. And it's so boring to even say that. I've fallen asleep just saying that line. But it really is structuring data. If you have these people who brag about the databases they have and, but we see 10,000 cardiac patients a year. Well, and what information do you have about that? Can I collect that and cross-reference it with people with metabolic disorders? Can I then cross-reference it and look at something else? If you don't have bone-up standardization or something like that, what use is it? So the modest thing for data as a whole is making sure that it's actually collected in a consistent way, it's structured in the right way, and it's accessible. And those are very small investments. And that data is then actually worth something, as opposed to these people, data's like the new oil. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's completely different. You cannot compare that, because with oil, you use it immediately. With data, you can't. So it's not new oil. You have to refine it first before it's actually useful. So we're not at that stage where we're actually capitalizing on the right type of data because we haven't invested in it. And to be very honest with you, I have never seen the front cover of a magazine or a newspaper with anyone with a big pair of scissors cutting a data infrastructure project. You want to be standing in front of a ribbon in front of an MRI machine. So until we get past that whole, the shiny tool is the thing that we want to invest in, an investment is a real piece of something, you actually have to invest a huge amount of time, effort, and energy into what happens behind the door, as opposed to the shiny machine that's sitting inside the room. And building in the business case for interoperability, data standards, and things like that, it's still thought of as the fluffy thing that goes alongside of the MRI machine. And until we change that mentality, we're still going to be struggling with the physical versus the thing that you just can't see and touch, which scares a lot of people.
I think our bioinformatics listeners will agree enthusiastically
100%.
with that, right? 80-90% of your time is spent data cleaning, data munging, right?
Completely.
So for our early career listeners, what questions should candidates ask during interviews but rarely do?
I very rarely find someone who's read enough about a complicated question to answer it themselves. And they'll usually turn and say, be interesting to know how you would approach this, or what are you looking for? And that's fine, but how would you answer it? Very rarely do they come with the solution themselves. I think it's because they want to be a dialogue to show that they've come up with the creative question, but answer it for me. I'd be much more impressed with you answering your question as opposed to flailing my take on it. And they probably have a better answer, to be honest, because they'll have different ways of thinking than I will have.
This has been fascinating. And for listeners who want to follow your work and your thoughts, what's the best way for them to follow you?
Most of the work that I do is on LinkedIn. It's probably the only social media that I really engage with. So find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure and really lovely to see you again. Thank you.
Likewise.
The Bioinformatics CRO provides computational biology services to academics, research institutions, biotechs, and pharmaceutical companies on a flexible hourly basis. Visit our website, bioinformaticscro.com, to learn more.